Welcome to the murky world of the grey market. This video was made as there has been a Spanish release on Blu-ray of True Lies that a lot of people are shouting bootleg, but this might not strictly be true. After just speaking to a few people, I've discovered that very few people have any idea what is known as the grey market. As you could expect being called the grey market, there are some legal lines that are blurred here, so I will do my best to explain. Another YouTuber, Eastwood for Life fan, asked me if I would make a video explaining the grey market, specifically in regards to movies, as in physical media such as Blu-rays and DVDs. However, I am going to touch on a few other markets. Firstly, let me tell you my experience with grey market goods. I've worked for 11 years as a sales manager for a well-known video company. I worked for 7 years as a sales manager for a well-known mobile phone company, and for 2 years as a buyer for the UK's biggest car auction company, all of which had dealings with grey market goods within those industries. There are other industries that also have substantial grey market presence too, such as pharmaceuticals, although I've had no dealings with them. I also have a further education qualification in law, although not directly linked with grey market goods, for example. It does give me an understanding about how the legalities are involved. I will talk about the True Lies Blu-ray specifically a little later on, but we have to talk about broader terms first of all. So to start, what classifies as a bootleg? A bootleg is essentially a counterfeit item and therefore completely illegal. So a bootleg film would be considered a black market item. Black market goods include but are not limited to counterfeit goods. Stolen goods, for example, might be considered another black market good. Grey market goods are made legally, generally in another country and for sale in that country. As you will obviously understand, there are different laws across the globe. In addition, if we're talking movie related specifically, often different companies will have different distribution deals with different companies and different countries. Some companies might distribute themselves all over the world. You really don't see Disney grey releases, for example, but many do not. It's especially true of home releases, and even more so in the modern world where physical media sales are on the decline. Some license holders for other films may be very cheap to distribute in certain countries, depending on the law of the country. Some rights may be vacant for certain titles and may not cost anything to distribute. However, grey market goods, although not illegal, are generally not authorised by the originating company and are not looked upon with good favour and may not be considered an official release from the originating company, but they are not illegal and therefore not black market, therefore not a bootleg. The clue is really in the title. Grey market skirts essentially what is loopholes within the law and can seem to be produced by the original licence holder, will get little or no money for the sale of grey market goods. Before we go any further, it's worth mentioning another legal term, public domain, which isn't directly linked to grey markets, but it is similar in some ways and is worth mentioning. Things in the public domain can be used by essentially anyone. This happens when a property created some time ago and after a certain amount of time passes, generally speaking between 70 and 120 years depending on the individual circumstances, the rights fall into what is known as public domain, which means anyone can produce content that includes these properties. For example, King Arthur, Robin Hood and Dracula are all in the public domain, which means anyone can feature these characters without fear of a copyright claim. On January 1st, 2024, we'll see the expiration of the copyright for Steamboat Willie, and with it, Disney's claim to the film star Mickey Mouse. The copyrights to Superman, Batman, Disney's Snow White and early Looney Tunes characters will all fall into the public domain between 2031 and 2035. That's not to say that the companies may try to hold on to these rights with legal cases. However, some of these rights may well end up in the public domain. Some are made to be in a public domain, such as a lot of music, for example. or some end up by legal accident, such is the case with George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. This is why you always see this movie playing on TV screens in other films, as they actually don't have to worry about the rights for it. It is comparable how distribution channels mixed with different countries' law may give the companies opportunities to distribute unauthorised grey market versions of the film. As I've mentioned, I've worked in industries that deal with grey market goods, and whilst I have had some dealings with them, these examples may give you some idea how the grey market works before we get into the films. So if we start with cars first of all, when you buy a new car, you're buying it for an authorised dealer, and the monies that you spend on the car go to the official channels, the dealership, distribution lines and manufacturers. Now, we're not going to be talking about the pre-owned or used car markets here, or really with anything, because that's really a separate issue. A black market car, for example, might be one that's stolen, with the VIN numbers are removed, shipped off to different international markets. A grey market car may be a car that was for sale, intended for sale in Japan, say, but may be imported into the UK, for example, because it's cheaper to do so than buying the UK version. With cars, a grey import car is not to the spec necessarily of the imported country. As a side note, there are a lot of imported cars in circulation that some people may not even be aware of. This significantly decreases their value, and it's worth, in the UK at least, doing what's called a CRB check. If you are spending a lot of money on a used car, if it's new, maybe it's not from a particularly reputable dealership, it's worth thinking about, as it may well be imported. This will also check if the car has ever been written off, or if there's any outstanding finance on it. Obviously, particularly in the case of used cars. I myself had an imported Toyota Celica and I loved it, so some people may not even care about it. When I worked in the phone industry, we saw a lot of black market phones, fake iPhones for example, that were made to have the casing of a real iPhone, but may have had basic Android software installed on its rudimentary systems. This is what was called a black market phone. A grey market phone, however, may be one that was intended for sale in a different country, but bought by UK firms to sell here, because obviously stock shortages, specifically with Apple. Apple UK will get no money from these sales and wouldn't approve of it, but they are not illegal. Similarly, when I worked in the games industry, sometimes UK suppliers would run out of stock, or in some circumstances, distributors will want to try they want to charge a high amount of money for very hot AAA titles with high demand. This sometimes meant retailers and sellers might look to source grey versions of the product. Not illegal, but considered underhanded and would sour relationships between companies. I remember a case where a Final Fantasy game was released on PlayStation, and the retailer games sourced grey market versions as they could not get enough stock. This caused a rift between them and the supplier, which actually resulted in the supplier refusing to sell game the next title. It was resolved eventually, but it gives you an idea of how the grey market may exist without even people realising. Now to films. Films, in a way, are a little more complicated, as you have a lot more companies involved than a lot of other channels. So you have to understand how the studio who makes the film is not necessarily the company that distributes it. Even if they do distribute it in America, it does not mean that they distribute it in other countries. This is why you would have a film that with home releases from different distribution companies. In addition, unlike games, which is its nearest cousin, I guess you would say, you also have multiple types of releases. Cinema distribution may be handled by one distribution company, whilst home release is handled by another. Some of these companies will have the option to distribute home releases for a certain amount of time, but these licenses sometimes become vacant after an amount of time. Factor in all the different variations of law in different countries, and you can see how the grey market takes advantage. I cannot tell you the exact legal position of certain film rights in certain countries, but we can make some educated guesses and some speculations. If you collect media books, for example, there's a good chance that you have bought some grey releases. Some of these older film licenses maybe vacant, freely available, or at very low cost. Just look at some of the newly commissioned artwork of some of these media book releases. Do you think the original film company approved them? No. This is likely because they are a grey release. We do see a lot of these from Germany, and I have some editions myself, particularly of the Punisher 1989 film from various different companies because they are grey releases. On a side note, I have seen some people say if the disc is purple, it's a bootleg. Not necessarily true. The purple disc means it's a burn-on-demand disc, and there are some legitimate legal versions of smaller indie films that are produced on demand that are completely legitimate. However, there is a good chance that bootlegs are going to be more likely to be burn-on-demand discs because it's obviously just cheaper. But it's not necessarily the case, so just keep that in mind. So, True Lies specifically has kicked up a storm because it's a high-profile movie that to date has never had an official Blu-ray release. It may never have an official release, as I understand it, as apparently James Cameron regrets his stereotypical portrayal of Muslim terrorists, and said he did not want it released on home formats after the DVD releases, and as things get a little bit more, touchy these days. The production company was 20th Century Fox, which has now been bought by Disney, so I now speculate it's even more unlikely to get an official Disney release, as that is very much against brand. And this is not even when you consider the recent announcement by Disney they are no longer making physical media apart from their recent blockbusters such as the Star Wars, the Marvel films, the Princess films. So all of the kind of the Fox stuff are unlikely to get much in the way of physical media anymore because they want to essentially drive traffic to the streaming services. Now, if you look on the production company page on IMDb, you can see a number of international production companies that will distribute this home version of the movie. This gives you a good idea of how many companies potentially can be involved in regards to distributions across the globe. In Spain specifically, United International Pictures had the theatrical distribution, but not the home release. I do not know the specific legal circumstances of the Spanish release, but I can tell you, I do not know the specific legal circumstances in regards to the Spanish release of True Lies. But I can tell you, in 2007, Spanish lawmakers pushed through a new controversial law in regards to film distribution and was intended to improve distribution and boost local young talent, independent producers and new technologies. It was designed to favour Spanish companies and loosen the grip of Hollywood and its distribution model. It also benefited the Spanish government for tax reasons. It is known as Film Law 2007, or in Spanish, Ley 55 2007 del Cine. With that in mind, and whatever the circumstances for a particular film, possibly the rights have lapsed, they may not specify a Blu-ray release in particular. After a certain period of time, the Spanish government may allow it to be distributed. Whatever the reason, in Spanish law at least, it appears to be illegal to produce this release. And it appears a legally produced release is therefore not counterfeit or black market. This is likely why you could buy the release directly from Amazon Spain itself, not just one of the sellers. So it looks like the version of the film is legal to produce and sell in Spain, therefore making it a grey market item if you import it to another country. Some people may still label this as a bootleg, but this isn't strictly true. Grey market goods, as the name suggests, is a dubious and murky affair. If black market means illegal and white market means official, it's aptly named to sit in between the two sides of the coin. The fact is, however, grey market products are not technically counterfeit and therefore, at least on a technical standpoint, are not bootlegs by legal definitions. Grey market in general is looked down upon by official channels and certainly is discouraged by them. Grey market channels can also follow unscrupulous legal loophole methods to get whatever it is the item wanted to be distributed. So it comes down to you if you choose to buy these items. In respect of True Lies specifically, I think this is as close to an official release that we are likely to get. The movie may turn up at streaming at some point. I personally don't buy bootlegs if I can help it, although I've ended up with a couple of TV series that were never released on any other format, and a couple of movies I unwittingly bought bootlegs from. Grey releases I don't really have a problem with, as they are often high quality and as near to an official release as some might get. So that hopefully explains a little bit about how the grey market works and where it kind of sits and the legalities of it, and hopefully can maybe clears up some of the confusion, specifically with True Lies, but other kind of films as well. I'm no legal expert on this thing specifically, I just have had some dealings with it, so I have a little bit more of an understanding than maybe some. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.